As usual, Osrith was already up the next morning before dawn, carrying and fetching in the palace kitchens, water, vegetables, deceased chickens. Her tasks had increased since she was last in that cold, stuffy place, the meager fire doing little to raise the temperature, as several of the jobs the servant girl, who looked ready to give birth any day, had fallen Osrith's way, and the servants purchased at Tara were slow and reluctant, still at the beat them to break them stage. Osrith stared through the open courtyard door at the wretches, many from over the water, from Cumbraland, her mother's kingdom, and southern Northumbria, by the coast opposite the coast of Irion. Osrith had seen a map in the monastery showing all of the kingdoms of both isles. A young monk, Andra, who opened the monastery to the little scholarly party each morning, pointed them put to her one night when she had returned claiming to be preparing her lessons, but instead was seeking more information about Utah. He had shown her Alba and Mercia, Wessex in the south, and East Anglia, Wales, and Cornwall. On the smaller isle the Uineal territories were picked out large and bold, marking their importance. But Osrith's eye had caught a tiny fortress on England's east coast, marked Bibbenberg, close to Pitland, far from Wessex. Now, as the sun stretched its rays over the stony courtyard that morning, Osrith wondered whether they had all come from England. Christians were not supposed to enslave Christians, yet half a dozen were young men with strength in their arms, who whipped their chains and begged in vain for God to grant their freedom. Poor men, Osrith thought, as the guards beat the men with sticks until they cowered away towards the damp, mulchy earth. Poor men traded for gold, men like Finoli, who may have wronged someone more powerful than them, or had just gone voluntarily to prevent their families from starving to death. Not all of them were from the British Isles, though 2 other men were dark-skinned, clearly purchased by the Danish slaver from a land overseas. They were more willing than the other men to work, and worked faster than the Irish servant girls, who clearly resented their efficiency, hurling terrible insults to the 2 men about the tortures they wished on them in hell as they went by, though not being understood at all. 1 or 2 of the slave women looked up, the ones Osrith suspected were of Cumbraland, for Cymric was similar to Gaelish, and they cowered behind their buckets of well water, hoping that the servants did not curse them to hell next. Osrith empathized with the dark-skinned girls, their black hair standing proud of their heads against the pale blue autumn sky, wishing she could offer her sympathy. But neither spoke Gaelish, Anglish, Saxon or Cymric. The slave keepers had tried those languages out on them the day before. They did understand the stick and the leather horselash, however, though neither of the 2 had done anything to deserve a beating, but they got one anyway, to show them their place. Osrith had decided to give them bowls of gruel a little fuller than those of the Irish servants, and, that morning, smiled at them as they beat the laundry with stones and stood between them as 2 stable hands tried to back them into the storehouse, the handle of Tadg's short sword in her grip, ready to pull it. It was they who found Osrith that morning, when the Irish servant began to groan, a thin liquid, dark and bloody, running down her leg. Shouting what sounded like instructions to Osrith, pointing and grasping her tunic, Osrith realized that the girl's baby was to make an appearance, and soon. As she turned to look for help, Osrith realized she was the help for which the pregnant girl's eyes were searching, and a sudden feeling of panic flashed through Osrith, and she grasped for the thick, oak-ill-fitting planks that bordered over ancient posts, nausea following soon after. She felt a hand on her shoulder and looked down. It was the other servant girl pulling at her jerkin, trying to get her attention, speaking Irish so fast that Osrith could not make out the words. Terror was etched into her brow. There was something wrong, something very wrong with the birth, and both Irish girls knew it. Osrith approached the girl, looking at her face, her hands, and down to her legs. It was clear both girls expected her to do something. She did. She reeled, acid sickness catching in her throat as the girl cradled her hands between her legs, more blood seeping out onto them. "Come," Osrith encouraged, beckoning both girls down back to their beds. But both of them stopped still, the other girl gabbling something which sounded beseeching, panicky. Maybe she could stay in the hall and get someone else to help. Osrith knew little of birth, and she paced away from the servants, to a howl of dismay as the pregnant girl buckled over towards the whitewashed wall of the back kitchen, her friend shouting back to Osrith as she supported her. Before Osrith she had a chance to find anyone, however, a knock at the kitchen's oak door drew her attention. As she opened it, it was none other than the Princess Mary, giving her a solemn, doubtful look. "You are to take us to the monastery now," the girl demanded, folding her arms. Beyond the gate, in the quadrangle of the palace gardens, the Ocher children stood. "Aunt Muir commands it, and—" A scream broke her sentence. Startled, Mary looked past Osrith and up along the stone-floored passage. "It's the servant girl," Osrith explained, looking towards the scream, low and long as it was, like a cow in pain. "You are helping," Mary concluded, stepping back through the door, trying to close it behind her. But Osrith gripped onto the iron ring of the latch, holding the door firmly, her knuckles going white. Mary looked up into Osrith's face. "You are going to help," she declared, as vomit regurgitated into Osrith's throat. "And do what?" Osrith managed, gagging on the sour backwash in her mouth. "You would have been drowned the day you were born," her uncle Elfric had often told her bitterly, usually when he had given a good proportion of his wealth in tribute. So Osrith had ensured she had behaved as much like a boy as she could, and avoided learning womanly skills, including childbirth. Mary looked between Osrith's hand, still gripping the door frame, and her face. Another scream, low and cold, made Osrith shudder. Mary beckoned terrified servant girl who had followed Osrith. Beside her, Ayla, the Irish servant, babbled something again. "Go," Mary commanded, in Gaelish to the girl, then turned her haughty face to Osrith. "You will know what to do. Go with her." And, before waiting for an answer, the princess strode off in the direction of the kitchen. Ailey, the pregnant servant, was still moaning, though not so loudly. Her face was pale, shimmering with perspiration. Osrith went to console her, to help her, but the girl's body felt too fragile, as if the next sigh would be her last. "Lie her down," she suggested, but Ayla pushed her away. "She must stand," the servant girl said, then pointed towards the back rooms, where they slept. Osrith bent to curl Ailey's arm around her neck, to get her to the back rooms, but she shuddered, then screamed. Ayla shouted at Osrith to stop. "No." Mary's voice rang out down the stone passageway. Osrith turned to see the Limerick princess hurrying after them, pointing. "No. Blackwater." "Blackwater?" Osrith echoed, looking around. Ayla, who was holding Ailey's other arm, screamed, pointing behind the now weakening girl. "The baby is in danger." Mary shot back, dropping the bundle of blankets she was carrying. "Stand her up, as tall as you can make her." "And then what?" "What, indeed?" The morning passed, whether it was hours or minutes, Osrith could not say. Ailey howled as Osrith drew her upright, walking her to the rooms in which they slept, Ayla comforting her. "The babe that grows within her takes her strength," Mary told Osrith, who narrowed her eyes as the girl thrust a bucket of hot water into Osrith's hand, demanding the kitchen maid bring them more. "You know a lot about this," Osrith commented, as Mary instructed Ayla to take her clothes, then position Ailey so she could help birth the child, through a tangle of blood, black water, clear fluid. "My sister is married to the king in Munster. I am here for my education. But before I came, I helped my sister." Mary smiled, and Osrith realized the smile was intended to reassure her. After that, the time passed indeterminately, as Mary took charge, comforting and encouraging the girl on turn as she labored painfully to produce, in the end, a small but healthy boy. Osrith stood back as Mary instructed Ayla on how to help Ailey with her son, just one thought in her mind, to find the heathen, Betha, and beg her to show her ways of getting rid of it. "Now get water," Osrith heard a tired, fluid-covered Mary tell the kitchen maid. "She needs rest and to drink." Osrith stumbled past them, nausea in her throat, darting as she was for the door to the courtyard and into the open air. She stood by the hay cart that one of the slaves was unloading, inhaling the fresh harvest's scent deeply. After a few moments, she was aware that a now clean, spotless Mary was approaching her. Osrith turned her head, smiling at the girl. The sun shone high and warm in the summer sky as Mary began to speak to her, but she turned and vomited. All that blood was all Osrith could manage, and she felt the girl's smile light on her face. "You have been in battles," Mary replied, astonishment in her voice. "You have known such horrors." Osrith looked at the princess, who had conducted herself with such grace as she comforted and soothed the servant girl. "Battle? Yes," Osrith scoffed, holding her stomach and vomiting again. "Battle is easy, you stab, cut, kill, and the ground fills with the filth of spilled guts and the mounds of metallic-smelling bodies of men. Now meet." "But birth—" Osrith broke off, looking past Mary to the back kitchen rooms where a soft crying was coming. "It is delicate, it is cautious. How did you know what to do?" "My sister, Queen in Munster. She has had many children, not all of them living. I learned to help her." Osrith turned and vomited again. Mary laughed gently, not mockingly, and Osrith laughed too. The younger girl placed an arm on her shoulder, tenderly. "Perhaps there is a place for all of us. To be a warrior, like you, to be a midwife, like me. We will both become mothers, in the end." "Not I. I will never marry," Osrith declared. "Do you think she is married?" "I will never bear a child," Osrith corrected. "No child will grow in me. I could never warrior if I became with child." Mary patted her shoulder, which twinged a little still from her fight in Tara. "I think you will be a mother," Mary said, as Osrith heaved again onto the earth. "Would you like to see the baby?" A warm summer wind wove around them, as Osrith watched Mary walk towards the kitchen doors. No, a thought told her, but she followed the princess anyway, haughty Mary, who had probably saved 2 lives that morning. Ailey was producing the afterbirth as Osrith made her way through the oak doors, which caused her to pale again. Mary thrust a wooden bowl of now cooled boiled water towards her, which Osrith drank down gratefully. A few words between Ayla and herself, which Osrith couldn't quite grasp, though sounded like instructions and reassurances. Then Mary told Osrith she was to change. "When Aunt Muir asks if this, you must tell her you did this," Mary sighed, exhausted with the effort of the morning. "But it is unseemly that I would have intervened. Ayla will wash my clothes. She will tell it was you, not me." "But," then Osrith stopped protesting. It was clear Mary had breached royal, and social, boundaries by birthing bastard child that morning. It was also clear that the haughty, imperious princess felt it was safe to confide in her. Osrith, female warrior, daily reminded to everyone that she was damned for it. Osrith watched Mary head towards the royal quarters, and she turned, in the warm sun, making her way towards the monastery. The children had been taken across by Gormleth and, when Osrith arrived, had been busy on their letters. For the younger boys, Gormleth, noticeably thinner than Osrith remembered from her time at the Tara Fair, stood reading the Gospels, her heart-shaped face lined and colourless. She smiled her delicate smile as Osrith entered the tiled library, though Osrith discerned its bow seemed weighed by a heavy force. Mary joined them shortly afterwards, and Osrith's mind turned from Gormleth as that morning's midwife, resuming her proud, lordly demeanour as if that morning had never had been. Once or twice, Osrith glanced at the girl as she looked up from her work, twinkling her pale blue eyes at Osrith. The rest of the day passed uneventfully before she organized the little party to cross back to the palace. Leaving them at the door to Muir's chamber, mind filled with thoughts of the monastery, and particularly a fresh batch of letters which had arrived that morning, Osrith was surprised when, as the door opened to let in the royal children, it remained open and she was summoned in. "I'm hardly dressed for an audience with the Queen," she thought, as she trod her muddy boots onto the delicately woven carpet. Yet it was Queen Muir who had summoned her and, with the children at her side, asked her about the events of the morning, congratulating her. "Yet, you neglected your duties," Muir rebuked, harshly. The children were left unprotected for nearly 3 hours. They had to find their way to the monastery themselves. "Mary has missed her studies, for you did not know where she was." Osrith stopped herself from looking at the girl, but she could feel her eyes on her, begging Osrith to hold her peace. Could not see the girl suffer. The child was in danger. We are all God's creatures and my instinct was to help one of them to live. Then, she bowed her head, hoping she sounded penitent. I should have guarded the children, Your Grace, only I thought the other servant girl could handle the birth. Yet, Ailey produced black waters, and a look of horror passed over Mia's face for a moment, betraying to Osrith that the Queen knew the gravity of such an event, even though she, Osrith, didn't. But, she would never forget the look on Ailey's face, the look men gave her at the point of death on a battlefield. She never wanted to put herself into that much danger, and resolved again to find Bethu and Finn, to procure from them herbs and roots to prevent a child, even permanently, if only she could find them again. I will overlook it, Mia said, interrupting Osrith's thoughts, but this evening, Mary will make up her studies with you before your meeting with Domhnall. That was news to Osrith, and she said so. The thought of an evening searching for her brother and Pika in the monastery's recent correspondence evaporating like morning dew. My son told me, Mia said, then raised her hand, dismissing Osrith, with Mary at her side. Domhnall? Why was he privy to a meeting with Domhnall? Osrith thought about this as they trod the dry earth between the back of the palace again and the St. Comsil's monastery, Mary walking silently next to her. And she was still wondering that when she dismissed the now more educated Mary back to the palace before crossing over the short grass to the stables. The warmth of the animals was oppressive on that balmy night, and Osrith found Tagged and Fergus up on the stable roof. With them was the heir to the northern Neil, who stared at Osrith as she sat down next to Tagged, who offered her the rest of his apple. She bit into it, listening as Tagged and Fergus discussed why it might be that Domhnall wished to see them, her heart sinking at the realization that one of them was missing, Finn O'Ly. She had been expecting to see the warrior sitting with them, stretched out next to Tagged as he ribbed the blonde-haired warrior about his belief in the Psyche, or sipping ale from a tankard as Fergus regaled them with a far-fetched story about a battle in the Highlands against the Alpin family's biggest rivals, now firmest friends, the Greyers. Her eyes rested on Domhnall again as Tagged passed her ale. What was he doing here? Why was he at Domhnall's meeting? She knew she would be subject to a beating, otherwise she would have leapt on the prince and beat him, for what he had done to her at Tara, and what he had done 2 days before, laughing as he fouled the passage she had spent the morning cleaning, with horse shit, causing her to have to re-clean the whole lot. Sensing tension, Tagged moved nearer to her, congratulating her on birthing the servant's child so well that morning. Osrith nodded, dismissively. It had been Mary, of ours, and she felt as if she should congratulate Constantine, who had settled down next to her on the sun-warmed clay tiles, on his betrothal to such a sensible girl. My son told me, Mia said, then raised her hand, dismissing Osrith, with Mary at her side. Domhnall? Why was he privy to a meeting with Domhnall? Osrith thought about this as they trod the dry earth between the back of the palace again and the St. Comsil's monastery, Mary walking silently next to her. And she was still wondering that when she dismissed the now more educated Mary back to the palace before crossing over the short grass to the stables. The warmth of the animals was oppressive on that balmy night, and Osrith found Tagged and Fergus up on the stable roof. With them was the heir to the northern Neil, who stared at Osrith as she sat down next to Tagged, who offered her the rest of his apple. She bit into it, listening as Tagged and Fergus discussed why it might be that Domhnall wished to see them, her heart sinking at the realization that one of them was missing, Finn O'Ly. She had been expecting to see the warrior sitting with them, stretched out next to Tagged as he ribbed the blonde-haired warrior about his belief in the Psyche, or sipping ale from a tankard as Fergus regaled them with a far-fetched story about a battle in the Highlands against the Alpin family's biggest rivals, now firmest friends, the Greyers. Her eyes rested on Domhnall again as Tagged passed her ale. What was he doing here? Why was he at Domhnall's meeting? She knew she would be subject to a beating, otherwise she would have leapt on the prince and beat him, for what he had done to her at Tara, and what he had done 2 days before, laughing as he fouled the passage she had spent the morning cleaning, with horse shit. Sensing tension, Tagged moved nearer to her, congratulating her on birthing the servant's child so well that morning. Osrith nodded, dismissively. It had been Mary, of ours, and she felt as if she should congratulate Constantine, who had settled down next to her on the sun-warmed clay tiles, on his betrothal to such a sensible girl. They were to return, Domnall told them, at Samhain, to spring a surprise winter attack on Eochaid at Glashku, offer peace terms and make the usurpers pledge fealty to Domnall, take some of their kin as guests into the household, hostages in lieu of Eochaid and Giric's elegance. His troops had, he explained, pledged loyalty to Giric, but would turn on the usurpers once Domnall had shown himself ready to battle in late autumn. I need every one of you to be at my side, my royal guard. Should I fall, he looked at Domnall, Constantine must retreat, you must. Domnall insisted, as Constantine opened his mouth to protest, for you are of Sained MacAlpin's kin, you are my heir. That last sentence, spoken clear and true in the late August evening, brought them all silence, the sharp, direct point of them being there, and being in exile too. Minds laid dormant over the time they had been in Muir's court over the water in Irene sprang to attention. Domnall is accompanying us. As Constantine and I have been graciously harboured in exile, so will we do for our aunt the same service for Domnall. Domnall Mac said nothing, just looked solemnly at his cousin. Then, Osrith recalled Domnall's words when she had stood before Flansinna, in his first act as High King, you have come between Domnall and Doncharda. Both sought the throne after Flann, Osrith realized, and Muir had arranged with Domnall for her eldest son to be exiled with Domnall when they returned to Alba in return for his battle service. She looked across to Domnall, who caught her eye, narrowing scornfully at her. Better hope he grew out of silly pranks, as Constantine had done, before they left, or he might find himself on his arse. And better, Osrith thought, that she sought the heathen again, Bethu and Finn, so she was fit to fight for her lord. Before dawn, Osrith trod the miles past the monastery and out to Loch Foyle, thoughts of illness and lily root in her mind and silver in her pocket should Betha be able to sell her more. There was no sign of either woman or boy however, and Osrith chose to bathe in the cool water before hurrying back to the monastery. Out beyond the castle, as she raced into the grounds, Domnall was drilling his men. A banner in the ground, a red right hand gripping a cross, like the ancient symbol of the Ulaid in the Gospel book that Muir left to be completed at Kells. Osrith smiled to herself at the rivalry, the Uineal had gone one better, declaring for Christ that the ancient pagan red hand of loyalty took up Christ in its fist. Was he convincing his stepbrother, however? Domnall was not the most diligent of people, and to now be drilling his men after his meeting with Domnall seemed to Osrith a little suspect. Yet, reports had come in that Danes had been raiding the Ulaid coast. It was good for everyone that they were prepared. The children were waiting at the royal building's doors. She was late, and Mary looked to be preparing to walk with the children across to the monastery. Each older girl had two of the younger boys squirming in their grasp, and she smiled at the sight of Osrith racing towards them. Andra, one of the novices, let them through the side door of the monastery, straight into the church, warm harvest sun lighting up the cloister, spilling over the 6 scholars like melted butter as they trooped to the chapter house through the side door, then down to the scripture room, where they would have their lessons. Osrith thanked Andrew as he opened the day's learning out in front of her. Why Mary or Ira still needed teaching, Osrith didn't know. They were soon to be wed to Domnall and Constantine, yet they had followed her as brightly and silently as they always had done, helped the boys up to the tables as the willowy Gormlath, whose face seemed even more pale in that morning's early light, laid out scripts, and, as ever, Osrith heard them read, copy out texts as the children recited passages in turn. When they were writing, Osrith took a chance on some freshly stored manuscripts, hoping for a word or two from Wessex. But, it was only when she felt Mary's delicate hand on her shoulder that Osrith realized she had spent so long reading. Their relationship had changed since Ailey's birth, and Mary's cool, capable demeanor contrasting with Osrith's horror at it all. Now, Mary treated her with a little more respect. Osrith confided more work to the girl, allowing her to manage her own WPRK and take charge of the younger princes. Good book. It tells of the kingdoms over the sea. Osrith tried to sound vague. For, she had discovered, a great victory had been won, the Danes had taken every kingdom of the Heptarchy bar one. Wessex was the last kingdom still ruled by Saxons. Alfred of Wessex, the king, had taken a few dozen men to fight them, a last stand. And, at hand done, they beat the Danes. Guthrum, whose since pillaged Ulaid territory, had been baptized. A powerful king? Osrith thought that night, as she listened to the murmurings of the little child with its mother across by the other stone wall. Biccar had been there, he had written the letter, which had gone the long way, Lindisfarne, Culdis, Iona, Ratlin, before it ended up at Doia, each monastery taking a copy before sending the original on. She had traced over his letters with her fingers, the same rounded letters as she had seen in illuminated books wrote of King Alfred's glory. Could she imagine he would be reading it? Dear Biccar, who gave his lessons to her, fleeing himself from Bibbenburg. That she had found him, at least alive, as recently as May gave her reason to hope. Osrith closed her eyes, and prayed, for the battle survivors, for Biccar and Utad, whose name was not mentioned, but, from another document, credited him with loyalty to Alfred. She prayed she would see her brother healthy and that, after all those years,